Welcome, everybody. Tom from IGN here with Bill and Nate from Nintendo Treehouse. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. We're going to talk about Nintendo's E3 Direct. This was a great packed show, obviously. Showed off a ton of stuff, a new WarioWare game, a new Smash Bros. Character. But I want to jump into that last one more thing, because I think it's the first thing everyone's going to want to talk about. It's the thing that the internet is ablaze discussing right now and speculating on, which is the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. You guys showed off about a minute and a half trailer with some gameplay and some story beats and all that sort of stuff. Very exciting. But I wanted to dig in a little bit more into some of the stuff we saw, if we can. Specifically, I would be remiss not to ask this right away, because a lot of people are already discussing it. Age of Calamity which is also getting DLC, as we learned today, had directly to do with time travel. There's a lot of stuff in both the Breath of the Wild trailers that we've seen now that have like this sort of backwards song sort of motif in the singing of the song. There was a couple shots of things reversing with abilities that Link was now using. So what's going on here? Is this game linked to time stuff, time travel in some way? It seems to be what all of that is sort of indicating, at least. Bill, why don't we start with you?
All interesting observations. It's amazing the degree to which people will analyze the trailers and look at sort of every frame and every little tidbit to see what they can glean out of it. Obviously, I think right now we're just really excited to be able to show off some new footage and show off some live gameplay from the game, or gameplay in the form of a trailer. So I think that's kind of the big news for us is just letting people dig into that and kind of guess what they can, and you'll get more information on some of those details as we get closer to when it launches in 2022.
Yeah, that's actually what I loved about this trailer was it gives us just enough questions to keep us talking for so much time. Because I was the same way as practically everybody who watched the trailer, which is, how is he tunneling through rock? How did he move that spiky ball back up the hill? And I feel like the anticipation of learning about that, especially given the entire world of the Breath of the Wild universe, is gonna sustain me for quite a long time, and I hope it does for everybody else too.
Obviously, I assume you can't go into too much detail here, but we do see that sort of like Link's arm getting sort of corrupted or what have you, and then using abilities from that arm, including kind of like what looked like almost a new sort of flamethrower thing at one point, though that might have been from the other arm. It was a lot to go on, right? But that arm, people are picking out that actually there was some concept art with Link's arm looking that way from the original Breath of the Wild that was brought back or was shown in a behind the scenes a couple years ago. Is that a fair connection to draw for fans? Nate, why don't we go with you?
I think you can draw a lot of connections, and whether or not they turn out to be true is pretty much anybody's guess. I agree with you. I think that I remember seeing that concept art when Mr. Fujibashi showed it off, and I think that I imagine he's kicking around a ton of different ideas, some drawn from past inspiration, some new ones. And as far as I feel like when I was watching that trailer, the whatever the item was that he was using with his left hand, that was maybe even a different hand, and so.
Right.
It's like I don't even know what are weapons and what are powers. For me, again, it comes back to almost more questions than answers right now, and I almost like that better than having the answers, since I can't have the game in my hands right this second. So,
well, I think I can speak for fans when there might be a lot of people a little uncomfortable in the squirm with anticipation, right? Like with all those questions. One thing I did want to ask about the sequel in general too is there's a lot of comparisons you can draw, not about specifics, but about sort of what this game is at least shaping up to be. It seems almost like does Nintendo see this as almost like a cousin to something like Majora's Mask? Because there's a lot of things to be drawn there, where Majora's Mask was a a much darker game, right? It reused a lot of the same sort of, like, not just full on reused, but, reused a lot of the same technology, same assets, borrowed a lot of the stuff from Ocarina of Time in that regard to tell this new story. And that seems like where this sequel is going. Does Nintendo kind of view those games similarly, or are they akin to each other, Bill?
I mean, I would say it's an easy comparison or conclusion to jump to at this point in time, just given, what's been shown so far and given the nature of it being a direct sequel. It's not often that there is a direct sequel to a Zelda game. And so I understand people making that conclusion. But at the same time, and I don't want to kind of delve too much into it, but this is its own game. And I think that the way that it builds on Breath of the Wild, which already was such an expansive game with so many layers of Link's abilities and layers to the gameplay, I think this is going to layer quite a bit more into that. And I think that by the time you finish playing it, I think everybody's probably going to come to the conclusion that this is really sort of its own thing. And I think as we start to show a bit more of the game over the coming months to the next year or so, I think it'll probably start to be a bit more apparent where this game kind of stands on its own and what makes it so unique.
We also got a release window for this sequel with 2022, which I believe is the first time we've gotten any sort of like actual date. There's been a lot of speculation on that for a long time, but nothing actually hard in that regard. But Aonuma did say that this is, they're asking for a little bit more time, people for being patient. What went into, I'm curious, Nate, what went into the reason this is taking as long as it is? Not that it's not saying, like how is it taking this long, but like, like what kind of factors have gone into them looking for a little bit more time on this?
Nothing too dramatic here, really. It's the core Nintendo philosophy shared across teams, and certainly on the Zelda team to release a game when it's ready. And development is complicated. Obviously, it takes a long time, and this will, when it releases in 2022, it'll be basically a 5-year gap between the last game, not completely out of the ordinary. And I think that we've seen time and time again that letting our developers see their projects through on a timeline that brings a game out in really the state that they want it to be in is always worthwhile. As painful as it may be for us as fans to have to wait extra time, it almost always is worth it. So nothing. You wouldn't point to any really one thing as far as what has been taking up the extra development time. It's really an aggregate of just making the game that it should be. So let's just got to wait a little bit longer. I'm right there with everybody else. Trust me.
I think Nintendo has earned that patience in that regard a lot, as if past games are any indication, at least. And last question about Zelda for Bill. I've had to dance around it a couple times. I've had to catch myself a couple times already of calling it the sequel to Breath of the Wild, right, rather than Breath of the Wild 2. So I guess just flat out, like, why are you holding back on the name? And also, are you guys upset when you hear Breath of the Wild 2 as people calling it that, kind of colloquially?
Well, certainly not upset. I mean, that's going to be shorthand, and I think it's natural for people to want to find a shorthand way to frame it. We're still calling it the sequel to the Breath of the Wild. I think, as far as why we're holding back on the name, you'll just have to stay tuned because obviously, Zelda names are kind of important, those subtitles, and they start to give little bits of hints about maybe what's going to happen. But you'll just have to stay tuned and look forward to when we finally do decide to reveal it.
Fair enough. Let's talk about the other kind of, what sticks out in my mind is the other major game announcement from this E3 Direct, which is Metroid Dread, which is a name that, unlike the Breath of the Wild sequel, which we haven't gotten yet, was a name we got almost 2 decades ago, seemingly. This is a name that I think is infamous now on the internet, or it's been around forever in rumor and myth and legend and whispers around schoolyards, that sort of thing. how much connection does this Metroid Dread have to kind of all of that lore and those rumors and those going back to, I think it's 2005 was the earliest mention of this game, at least in rumor. Nate, please.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I think that the core of the game dates back to exactly what you're talking about. Really, in the interview with Mr. Sakamoto, he made it clear that he had really this central idea of a dread. This relentless threat that's stalking Samus, and the gameplay that would grow out of that conceit. Had it in his head way back when, and it was something that just he couldn't bring to fruition because it didn't have sort of first of all, the tech to realize what his vision was for it. And then the secondary component to it was finding a development partner, which he has found in Mercury's team. In working with them on Metroid Samus Returns, really, he realized that they just get the franchise. They understand Metroid gameplay. They understand what makes it so good and so unique. And that combined with the power of the Nintendo Switch, it was time to bring it back.
And it is more than just it's a 16-year wait and more than just rumor, right? Because this is a direct sequel to Metroid Fusion, and is now y'all are calling it the end of Samus's saga in this sort of like initial 2D Metroid game series. Bill, what does that actually like mean in terms of like the end of Samus's story here? Because obviously that doesn't mean the end of Samus, and Metroid Prime 4, as you mentioned, is still in development.
Yeah, well, and obviously, we've got the 2D Metroid series. The Metroid Prime series is its own series that's kind of distinct from the core 2D Metroid storyline. Metroid Dread it serves as sort of the closing of the curtain on the current 5-game story arc that started with Metroid. Of course, it doesn't mean it's the end of the 2D series, and it doesn't mean it's the end of Samus's adventures, but it does kind of serve as a break point in that story arc. And personally, I think, I'm excited for it. I'm excited for the story that Sakamoto-san has to tell, and I think everybody's going to feel that not only is this an important point in the storyline, but it's also, I think, almost Samus at really kind of her most powerful, and just the fluidity of motion that you see with some of her new abilities in this game really is going to feel like the pinnacle of Metroid that we've seen up until now.
And speaking of this being the right moment for Metroid Dread to finally come out, obviously the Dread subtitle is, we got a glimpse of the Emmys kind of chasing Samus and this very tense sort of unkillable enemy that you have to run and hide from within this game. This does also feel like a good moment for this game to come out because the sort of survival horror genre, not that this game is outright horror, but is that sort of genre is on the rise right now, where we had Alien Isolation in past years. We've had the rise of Resident Evil 2's remake with Mr. X coming back. Like I get kind of whiffs of all of these things when I look at Dread. And Nate, I was wondering, is that fair? Were these games like Alien Isolation or Resident Evil, were those inspirations for what Dread has become?
I would say that I feel more like the inspiration came directly from Metroid Fusion and the SAX. Because to me, anyways, as a Metroid fan, the Emmy encounters are very evocative of that feeling of powerlessness that you had when you started running into the SAX. The music would cut out, you'd hear footsteps, and all of a sudden you're just like, I'm dead. I have to get out of here. That obviously is a game from quite a long time ago. So I'm with you though in the sense that the not necessarily survival horror, but the idea of survival in general, of being powerless for a certain period of time and then coming back with power is something that is very exciting from a gameplay perspective. It certainly is peaks and valleys. I can tell you from experience that playing this game and running through, just the depths of Planet ZDR, you're trying to survive, of course, and you're fighting all kinds of life forms. It feels very different the second you step into one of these patrol zones where the Emmys are. And all of a sudden your entire gameplay changes, and my palms start sweating, and I want to get out of there. and from a gameplay loop perspective, that is just hugely satisfying, because you're just going through these emotional ups and downs, and feeling palpable relief leaving one of these zones, but then knowing that eventually you got to go back in there eventually and kill this thing it just makes for a great gameplay loop, and I can't wait for people to experience it.
Yeah, it's very cool to see.
In fact, once you've played the game and you watch someone else play, all of those emotions come right back to you when you're just sitting there watching. I've sat down and watched Nate play, and it's like I can feel my own heart throbbing at moments where the enemy is closing in on him. I'm just like this. It's like my heart rate's going up already thinking about it.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and it's a good point, too, that this is kind of, I feel like this always has been sort of in the DNA of Metroid to some extent, and it's cool to see that now modernized and new and fresh with Mercury's Steam at the wheel. Thank you so much both to Bill and Nate for talking to me. It was an absolute pleasure. It was a very exciting E3 showcase, and we can't wait to see more of Breath of the Wild Not 2 and Metroid Dread and Tekken and Smash, WarioWare. You got a lot going on this year, so thank you so much for talking with us.
Oh, thank you.
Don't forget Advance Wars. Got to touch on Advance Wars. It's one of my favorite series. So thanks for having us.